graduate and get out into industry and get a job as a software developer, it's almost certain that you'll be working in a team with other developers and with marketing people and with the product owner who has some idea about what the product needs to be. You'll be working with the customer. And it's really the days when one person working in their own garage or basement could put together a significant software project are pretty much long gone. It might have been possible when I started out in the late 70s, early 80s, but it's definitely not the case anymore. So if you want to be working in this industry, you have to be able to work with a diverse group of people, and this gives you the opportunity to experience that firsthand. However, we know that this is a class, and we know that things can go wrong, and so we've tried to design the course in a way where it's possible for you individually to be successful, even if your team is having some trouble. So we're trying to avoid a situation where one person feels like they have to be responsible for saving their team and nobody else is working, and how we know how bad that can feel when you're stuck in that position, or where you feel like you can't be successful because somebody else isn't pulling their weight. And so we've designed the course in a way to try to mitigate that. And we'll be seeing how in a little more detail as we go on through the presentation. So it's a team-based class. We're going to be working on one project through the entire term. We're going to be using Agile software development methodology to put the project together. Kara will talk about it in more detail. Bottom line is we're going to be doing 2 sprints, which are separate passes of development. You'll also have to present your work at 2 presentations. These are oral presentations. We just got news today that the term is officially going to be online throughout the entirety of spring quarter. So there was some initial talk about coming back in May. That's no longer the case. The whole course is going to be online, and so we're going to be doing 2 presentations online using Zoom. So much like I'm doing right now, you'll be doing. 2 different types of presentations. One is going to be to the class. It's going to be a technical presentation for a technical audience. The second, the final presentation that we'll do at the end of the term, is actually aimed at businesses. So the people who are going to be using the product that you're going to be developing this term, that's who your target audience is. And we'll talk about that more as we go on through the class. This course covers a bunch of different stuff, some of which you've seen before and some of which you haven't. We're going to be using Agile with Scrum. We're going to be talking about user stories. Actually, at the end of today's presentation, I'll show you the stories we're going to be working on. You're going to be creating a GUI from scratch using a GUI builder. We're going to be using databases and working in teams. We're going to be using Git and GitHub for version control. You'll be exposed to unit testing and design patterns, and you will be developing and presenting as a team 2 separate presentations, as I just mentioned. So does anybody have any questions at that point? If so, feel free to enable your microphone and just shout them out. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody yet. So moving on. Your grade is going to be determined by 80% is going to be assignments. There's a little bit of variation in assignments this week. You're going to start thinking about the user stories, and you're going to ask some questions about them. You're going to design some interfaces, and you're going to start thinking about how you're going to actually implement the project, and you're going to put together some implementation notes. Most of your deliverables are going to be weekly uploads of your project in progress. So you're going to do some software development each week, and you're going to upload the progress to assignment folder. And then, of course, your presentations at midterm and final, and there are a couple of other interesting and novel assignments along the way. 20% is going to be participation, and I'll talk about that next. So as I mentioned, assignments are going to be due every Wednesday except for week 1. Week 1, I think, is due on Friday. Is that right? I'm not sure. It's in the course calendar. So as I mentioned before, we want you to be able to be successful even if your team is having some trouble. And so what's going to happen is that each person on a team is going to be working on a different story. And that means you're basically going to be working on a different application. The applications ideally will be using a common database, and ideally will be using shared code and libraries. But it is possible for you to do a good job on your application and your story and do well in the course, even if the other members of your team are having some trouble. So with the exception of the week 2 assignment, which is team-oriented, all the other assignments will consist of individual grades on your work for the week. Downside here in this class is that we have to be really tough on late assignments here because you're working in a team with other programmers, and because each week's development builds on the previous week's development. Most of the assignments consist of uploading your weekly progress. Be sure to get a working version of the code and upload that every week without delay. So if you have to make a choice between uploading something that works and working on a new feature that's going to knock our socks off, and we're going to look at this new feature and say, oh, this is the coolest thing since sliced bread, upload the thing that works. Okay? Nothing is less impressive than a program that crashes when you run it. In terms of participation, which is 20% of your grade, you will be assigned to a team, or you will pick members of a team to work on. We're looking for teams of 4 people. Your team must meet twice a week. And it doesn't have to be a long meeting. You have to do a stand-up. Carol will talk about what a stand-up is, but you can get a stand-up done with 4 people in about 15 minutes. So minimum of 15 minutes or so twice a week, where you basically talk about your progress, what you've done, what you plan to do, and what's in your way. We would like you to invite us to your meetings. So one of the first things you're going to do as a team is decide how you want to meet and when you want to meet. And we would appreciate it if you would invite us to your meetings as well. We may not be able to attend all of your meetings, but it's our plan to attend as many of them as we can. As I said, 3 to 4 students per team. If you have a preference, somebody that you maybe worked with in a previous class, or somebody whose introduction you liked in the Introduce Yourself discussion board, let us know who you want to work with. And if you haven't done that, we're going to go ahead and assign you just based on your language preferences. So the midterm presentation is going to be the week of 5/11. We're going to schedule it a little later in the term. We're going to do it in Zoom. And you're going to develop a slide deck and present it. We'll give you some tips on doing a good slide deck and creating a good presentation with your audience in mind. And then there's going to be a final presentation the last week of term. This is no longer accurate. We know that it will be an online presentation using Zoom. And this is no longer relevant either. We were providing for people to be able to Zoom into the meeting, even if it was face-to-face, but now everyone will be on Zoom. So if you need to download Visual Studio, if you're working in C#, there are Azure Dev Tools for Teaching, formerly Microsoft Imagine, and it was actually Microsoft Developer Network Academic Alliance before that. They have rebranded it a couple of times. But basically, it's a place where you can download a bunch of Microsoft projects for free. There's a link on this slide An older version of this slide deck is available in the course shell, so you can access that. In order to be successful in the course, you need a microphone or a webcam for the virtual meetings and for the presentations. And obviously, you're going to need a computer that you can connect with and internet access. If any of these things are a challenge, please contact us, the instructors, and let us know. There is some funding available for students who need help with technology this term. So definitely let us know, and we can point you in some directions where resources are going to be available. In terms of the required software, you're going to need Microsoft Word or OpenOffice, LibreOffice, something like that. You're going to need a development environment. Which one that you're using depends on which version, what programming language you're working on. And you're probably going to want to decide as a team what version, what platform you want to use and what version of the platform. You're going to need a way to talk to a SQL Server database. You're going to be doing it in code in your application, but you're also going to want to use something like SQL Server Management Studio or DataGrip to talk directly to your database, to configure the database and add tables and so on. And you're going to need Git for version control. There are tutorials in the course shell for using various parts of this. We expect that you've covered it in some detail in previous courses, but it may not be fresh. And you may need some reminders of how to do this stuff. So be sure to check out the tutorials in the course shell. And if you need additional help beyond that, first place you should always go is your team. Find if there's somebody else on your team who knows how to do something that you don't know how to do and get help from them. And if that fails, if nobody on the team can help you, feel free to reach out to the instructors and we can help you. Our office hours are going to be determined because we're going to be meeting online this term. But I think all three of us, Mike, Kara, and myself, are going to be available pretty often on Zoom. Probably the best way to reach us is through email saying, hey, I'd like to meet online. Can we set up a Zoom meeting? And I think we're all pretty flexible on that. And on that note, I'd like to hand it over to Kara for a presentation on Agile software development.
All right, great. I'm going to see if I can set up my screen then to share this. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Agile software development. Actually, let me open the chat just so I can, if I need to see. I want to be able to see the chat and it's not showing up for me. Let me see if I can figure this out quickly.
Yeah, I had that problem too, but I'll keep an eye on the chat for you if anybody has a question and I'll jump in and interrupt.
Oh, wait a minute, here it is. Okay, excellent, excellent, I found it.
Oh, okay, good. I'll have to find out from you how to do that later on.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, so I'm gonna talk to you guys a little bit about Agile and in particular, how we're gonna be using Agile software development in this course. And everything that I'm gonna be going over, these resources you can find in the Module 1 content section of the course. If you go to Content Module 1, there are 2 different slide decks on Agile software development, and then there's a Scrum reference card. And so I kind of combined portions of all 3 of those into what I'm going to share with you tonight, which will be a bit of a condensed version of all the information that you can find in those resources. So you can check those out. But so first of all, Agile software development. So I'm guessing most of you have at least heard of it, maybe heard some things about it, maybe don't know a whole lot about it yet. I saw in the introductions that some of you have actually used it. So it seems like we probably have a variety of experience with Agile in this course. But I want to ask you, when you think of Agile software development, what comes to mind? And feel free to go ahead and type in the chat. Are there certain flavors of Agile that you maybe think of that you have heard about? What What are some of the terms you've heard? What are some of the practices or concepts associated with Agile? What have you heard about Agile already? And feel free to go ahead and type in the chat there. Okay, I'm seeing shifting priorities as needed, flexibility, cooperation. It's quick. Yeah, terms like sprint and scrum. Less documentation, professional, meeting expectations. Kanban, stand-ups, social process improvement practices. Yeah, good. So yeah, lots of different terms and such can be associated with Agile. You've probably heard of, you know, a lot of things that are out there. So we're not necessarily going to be looking at all the different aspects of Agile, but we're going to use a certain flavor of Agile in this course. But realize that it's sort of an umbrella term that relates to kind of a family of approaches to software development. And so Agile is often contrasted with the waterfall model, right? Waterfall software development has been around for a lot longer. It's more of a traditional model. Agile is a little bit more of a newer and a modern model, so they're often contrasted with each other. And what this table shows, this is from the optional textbook, which goes into a lot of detail about you know, different kinds of Agile methods. And I'm not going to go through this whole table, but you can take a look at this and maybe think about some of these pieces and how waterfall is contrasted with Agile. But I just want to point your attention right now to the third row where it says that waterfall is more sequential in nature and Agile is more continuous. So when we think of waterfall, it's like a series of steps, right? And once you've completed one step, you move on to the next. And Agile, in contrast, is more continuous. You're sort of repeating a lot of the same activities and you kind of have this continuous flow. So that's one way that you can kind of think about waterfall versus Agile. And so one thing I did is I Googled waterfall software development and I looked at the images that came up to get kind of a visual idea of what waterfall is. And then I did the same thing for Agile. So if we take a look at waterfall, this image depicts a classic waterfall development model. So kind of starting out with requirements and analysis. Once you've got, you know, figured out what all your requirements are, moving on to design. Now you have your requirements, put together this design. Now you've got your design, go on to the coding phase. Let's implement everything. Now we've got it implemented. Let's do all of our testing, make sure everything works the way we want it to. At that point, we can deliver it to our customers. And then we sort of move into this maintenance phase where, you know, we're kind of fixing things as they come up and so on. And so the thing about this model is, you don't have a product to deliver to your customers until the end. Each of these steps, you know, in the pure waterfall model is sequential. You don't move on to the next step until you've completed one. And here were a bunch of the other images that came up when I Googled waterfall software development. So you can see all of these images have the same visual structure. So this just kind of gives you the visual depiction of the waterfall model. And so then if we take a look at Agile in contrast, this is one of the images that came up when I Googled Agile software development. And this image kind of gives you a nice little summary in the 3 steps you see of Agiles. And so first of all, we see that this is a cycle. It's a continuing cycle. So we have that continuous nature as opposed to the sequential nature of waterfall. And if we take a look at what's here, we'll kind of start with the green arrow on the bottom, which says iteration planning. So an iteration is just a window in time. It could be as short as 1 week. It could be longer, could be maybe a month, possibly more. And it's a time in which you can implement some features on your product. So we have our iteration planning, figure out what we're going to be doing in that iteration. Then in the red arrow, we have implementation. So we're going to actually implement those features. And then in the blue arrow, notice it actually says delivery and feedback. So the idea here is that we could actually deliver our product after a single iteration. If we had 1-week iterations, we could theoretically deliver our product, you know, every week after every iteration was over. So rather than, you know, having all our requirements in one big thing and then doing all the design and all the implementation step by step. In Waterfall, we're kind of doing a little piece at a time. Plan for a little bit, implement it, deliver it. Plan for the next little bit, implement it, deliver it. So we have this continuous cycle. And kind of the neat thing is, you can deliver your product to your customers a lot more regularly. At least that's the idea. And so here, again, some of the other images that came up when I Googled Agile software development. So you can just see visually, even the images that you see, quite different from the waterfall model. We have these circular, sort of continuous nature. So as I mentioned, Waterfall has been around for quite a while. Agile, we could say, got started in 2001 with the Agile Manifesto. And you can go to that website, agilemanifesto.org, and I just pulled it into this next slide here. So here's what you'll see when you go to that website. And this gives sort of the principles behind Agile software development as a software development methodology, and what makes, because there's many different types of Agile, many different flavors of Agile when you get down to the specifics, but they all kind of share some of these things in common. And so I'm going to go ahead and read this, and we'll take a little bit of a look at what this means. So this says, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value, and then we have these 4 rows, and each of these things, we're going to value the thing on the left more than the thing on the right. So we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And so, they're not saying throw out the documentation, throw out the contracts, throw out the detailed plans. Those things have value, but the things on the left are more highly valued in the Agile process. So very much, we talked about the continuous nature. So working software, being able to put out a working piece of software at just about any time you need to. Working more closely with your customers, that customer collaboration, having those interactions with the individuals. And, a plan is great. So we may even have a plan. We may negotiate a contract, but if your customers' needs change in the meantime, is it going to be more important to stick to that plan and deliver something that isn't quite what they need anymore? No. I mean, Agile is saying you want to respond to change, collaborate with your customer, produce some working software that will suit their needs. And of course, that's where the term comes from. Responding to change, being Agile is kind of having that ability to respond to change. So that's kind of the philosophy behind Agile software development. And as I said, it is a family of approaches to software development. And a lot of times you'll see companies or project groups sort of pick and choose different pieces of Agile. So there's certain flavors you might have heard, Scrum, Kanban, extreme programming, different things like that. But a lot of times you won't necessarily find a pure form of that being used, but a group will sort of put together what works for them. And so just to give you one specific example, I want to share with you what my team did. In my most recent job before I came to PCC, I was working as a full-time software developer. I was in a 6 to 10 member development team. We changed a little bit over time as people came and went. And at this company, we had a quarterly release cycle. So we released our product to our customers 4 times a year. And then within that quarter, we had 2-week iterations. So we'll actually be using the term sprint in this class. So we'll be talking more about sprints, but iteration is just another term for a sprint. That was the term we used at this company. So in that 2 weeks, we would implement some features or some stories. And then we would do a demo of what we had implemented at the end of that iteration. And we had business analysts that would sort of work with us and look at the demo and tell us, okay, yeah, that looks good. And then we would sort of send it over to the test team and we'd move on to the next iteration. And so in a given quarter, we would have 4 to 5 iterations where we were implementing features. And then we'd have a couple of bug fix iterations at the end of the cycle. So we pretty much did not fix bugs unless they were showstoppers. And so meanwhile, the test team, you know, as we were already moving on to the next feature, the test team was testing and finding bugs and stuff we had done and just logging all those bugs. And so built in to the cycle were a couple of bug fix iterations where all we were doing was fixing bugs. So that was kind of what the cycle looked like. Now, as far as our day-to-day operations, we had a stand-up meeting every day at 10 a.m. We literally stood up during our stand-up meetings. And that's kind of the idea of the stand-up meeting, to keep it short. At the beginning of an iteration, we had our iteration planning meeting where, and I should say that so before our team's iteration planning meeting, the team lead, along with all the other team leads, because we were really one team in a larger project of many teams. So all the team leads would meet together with all the business analysts and they would decide what stories or what features each team would be working on. So then when we had our team meeting at the beginning of that iteration, our team lead, you know, already had the set of stories that our team was going to be working on, and we would sort of divvy them up among ourselves. And stories can have different sizes, and we would usually have at least 2 people working on a story. And then, you know, during the rest of the iteration, again, we continued those daily meetings at 10 a.m., sharing with each other, just going around the group. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And what's standing in my way? What are the obstacles that might be standing in my way? And then we, in addition to all that, we had some other related practices that you'll find in a lot of Agile teams. So we very strictly practice test-driven development, where you know, you're writing your tests first. You don't write a line of production code unless it's to fix a failing test. So we did that pretty strictly. And sometimes we did pair programming. We would utilize that when it made sense, but we didn't do it all the time. And yeah, so that just gives you sort of one idea of how Agile was implemented in my experience. And again, some things are more agile about that and some things are less agile about that, but not necessarily strictly following one flavor of it, but just kind of putting a few things together. Okay, and so now I want to talk about how we're going to implement Agile in this class. And so we're going to use Scrum, although again, not strictly, we're adapting it to what works in this class setting. But this slide just shows you some of the terminology that we want to make sure we're kind of all on the same page with as we talk about some of these things. So we have roles, we have artifacts, we have meetings. And so we have 3 roles that we'll take a look at: product owner, scrum master, and team. And now as you all think about your role, what do you, of these 3, what do you think would be, which role or roles do you think will be your role as the students in this class? And everyone feel free to go ahead and type in the chat. What do you think your role might be? Team. Yeah. So you guys will all be team members. So yeah, so you'll be teamed up, working together as part of the team. And Agile teams and Scrum teams are, one of the principles is self-organizing. And so, for example, you all will get to sort of decide among yourselves who's going to be working on what in terms of the different stories and features and things that you'll be implementing. And ideally, you'll have, you know, collaboration. I know it's a little bit different in our online environment, and you know, this class is one responsibility among many that you all have, but ideally the collaboration will be close and working closely together in the team as well. So that's the team. Now, as you think about the instructors in this class, just which role or roles do you think the instructors will have among those 3, product owner, scrum master, or team, for the instructors? Go ahead and type in the chat. What do you guys think? product owner, maybe Scrum Master. Oh, did Mark give it away? Yeah, okay, so the instructors will be the product owner. So the product owner is the one who's responsible for the product vision. So the product owner maybe is a customer or totally understands the customer, needs and desires for this particular product. And so the product owner is then also going to be the final arbiter of any requirements questions that come up. And so in fact, in your first assignment that Mark will be talking about in a bit, you'll be coming up with some questions based on the requirements. And so the product owners will be the ones to address those questions. So we as the instructors will be acting as the product owners for this class. And so that leaves us with Scrum Master. Scrum Master, we're kind of all going to be sharing the Scrum Master role. So the Scrum Master, the idea behind the Scrum Master is to ensure that the Scrum process is understood and is being followed. And the Scrum Master would also try and shield the team from external distractions or interference so that they can kind of just stay in that Scrum flow and keep that continuous nature of the process going. And so we, as the instructors, will help you guys out in terms of like trying to help you understand Scrum or, keep that process going, but you guys can also help each other out. And especially I saw in the introductions that some of you have experience with this, feel free to, share that experience with your teams, and you guys we can all kind of share the Scrum Master role to keep the teams flowing and keep the process going. So those are the roles. And then let's take a look at these artifacts. So user story. So I've mentioned this already a couple times. A user story is really just a description of a feature from the perspective of a user. And actually Mark will be, showing examples of those when he talks about the project in just a bit. And so that's basically all a user story is, a description of a feature told from the perspective of a user. And then a task. So the stories can have different sizes. Some of them might be big, some of them might be small. You generally don't want them too big, but you've got a set of stories. But as you think about how are you going to actually implement that story, you're probably going to want to break it down into smaller pieces, and those will be your tasks. So you can break your story down into smaller tasks that you can implement to then get to the goal of implementing the story. We've already talked about the working product, having that working product that's available at the end of every sprint. The backlog is just your stories that you haven't implemented yet. So it's the list of all your stories that you've kind of got out there, and they can be prioritized and so forth as you decide then in your sprint planning meeting, which ones you're actually going to do next. Okay, and so then we have our meetings. So we have sprint planning meetings, stand-up meetings, reviews or demos, and retrospective. And I'm actually going to talk about these as we look at this next slide here, which kind of shows how these things happen in the flow and in the chronology. So your sprint planning happens at the beginning of your sprint. And that's basically where you're taking a look at the product backlog, all those stories that haven't been implemented yet, and figuring out which ones you're going to do. Now, for this class, we will tell you exactly which stories you're going to do in the first sprint. We want to make sure, everyone starts off on the right foot. And so we're going to tell you which stories to do in the first sprint. But in the second sprint, you will get to pick. So you'll get to take a look at the product backlog and figure out which stories would be of interest to you, or which ones you think would be important to users of the application, or whatnot. And you can select those stories during the sprint planning in the second sprint. So once the stories are selected, then we kind of you're actually in the sprint, you're doing the work, you're implementing those stories. And that's where you'll have in a full-time development team, it would be daily stand-up meetings. But for this class, as Mark said, we'll ask you to have 2 stand-up meetings per week. And so in those stand-up meetings, and again, you might, even though it's virtual, you can actually stand up, and not a bad idea to do that, to just kind of get the flavor of it. And the whole reason you want to stand up is because it's supposed to be short. And the standing up kind of helps you keep it short. You're not sitting down, you're not getting comfy, you're standing up. And you actually just go around. So everyone on the team should speak during the stand-up meeting and basically answer 3 questions, right? So what did you do since the last stand-up meeting? What are you planning to do? What are you currently working on? What do you plan to do before the next meeting? And what's getting in your way? What obstacles are getting in your way? And so the stand-up meeting is not the time to solve the obstacles that are getting in your way, but it's just a time, it's kind of like a status meeting so that everyone knows kind of where everyone else is, what everyone else is working on. And kind of once you complete those 3 questions going around the room, then you can continue your meeting. And then, if there are, obstacles that came up and one team member knows how to help out with that, you wouldn't know about that even occurring if you didn't have your stand-up meeting. So the stand-up meetings are really important. And then you can, kind of continue collaboration and working on some of those obstacles that might be in the way as you go. And so that's sort of your daily, or in our case, twice weekly stand-up meeting. And then the sprint review is where you're reviewing your product at the end of the sprint. So you got something working, you implemented, among the team, you implemented some number of stories, maybe you implemented a bunch of stories. And in the sprint review, you might be demoing that to a customer, to a business analyst, in our case, we'll actually have a presentation at the end of the first sprint, which will be to the rest of the class and to the product owners. And so you're showing what you've done. And then a retrospective, we'll talk a little bit more there's some content on that later in the course when we get towards the end of the first sprint. But a retrospective is another meeting that's typically done at the end of a sprint, where the team actually examines their own processes. So in an agile process, you're always looking to improve, and there may be certain things in your own team processes that you see that you can improve. And so the retrospective is just an opportunity to kind of stop, reflect on that, and pick 1, maybe 2 things to actually work on improving, some change to make, whatever it may be, as you move forward, so you can continuously improve your process. And so that's kind of the quick overview of Agile and how we're using it in this class. Does anyone have any questions on that at this point? Feel free to jump in with a microphone, actually, if you have one, or type it in the chat, whatever you like. But that concludes my portion. And so
I was wondering, so there's a recommendation for a textbook. Is that like strongly recommended? Is it like mandatory?
It's definitely not mandatory. It's more if you want to. So are you talking about, there were a few different, actually, should step back. There were a few different recommended textbooks. There's one on Agile methods, which
right, that one.
To. Yeah, so that one is just if you want to learn more about Agile. We'll be giving you everything you need to know about Agile for this course, but if you are curious about other aspects of Agile, or just if it's of interest to you, then you can feel free to get that. Other questions?
Great. So, sorry. So I guess I'll go ahead and grab the screen again. By the way, I just noticed that I forgot to swing my microphone in place last time, so I hope you could actually hear me for the first part of it. Let me go ahead and pull up a really brief overview of the project, and then we're going to actually look at the stories in more detail. So the project this term is a project around food insecurity. And you may or may not know, but food insecurity is actually a big problem for PCC students in particular, and for community college students in general. There was a recent survey that found that 60% of our students face some level of food insecurity, and almost 10% are what is considered extremely insecure, meaning that they may not have access to food for themselves or their family on a daily basis. So 10% of our students may not have access to food on a daily basis. Part of the way that PCC addresses this is by running a number of food pantries on each campus. They're called Panther Pantries. I don't know if you've heard of them or not, but it's a service that's organized through the ASPCC, the Student Council, and they run the pantries and staff it. They also have participation by the cafeteria services on each campus. When meetings happen on campus that involve placing food orders with the cafeterias, oftentimes not all that food is actually needed or served, but they have to make it anyhow. So they have a bunch of leftover food that's completely fresh, and they will donate that food to the Panther Pantries so that it can be distributed to students who are food insecure. But there's a problem here because the food is perishable, obviously. They made it fresh for the meeting didn't need it, went to the Panther Pantry. How long is it going to sit on a shelf before it goes bad? So what the pantry needs and doesn't have is a way of reaching out to students who are interested in being notified that food is available so that they can tell them, hey, we just got an order of hummus and pita bread, and it'll be available until 5 p.m., first come, first served. So that's what we're actually going to be doing. We're going to be building a system, actually a suite of applications that the Panther Pantries can use to contact students who are interested in finding out about food availability. So think of this as 4 separate applications. The first application is a system where students who are food insecure can register to receive notifications from the pantry that food is available. The second application is a system that pantry managers and staff can use to send notifications to students when food is available. The third story is a way to allow managers to create templates for messages so that people who want to send out notifications can just fill out a simple form instead of having to compose an English message from scratch. And then the fourth story is about keeping and reviewing notification logs so that managers and staff can review what notices were sent out to make sure that students are being contacted when food is available, that duplicate messages aren't being sent out, that everybody is using the system appropriately, and so on. And those are the stories that we're going to be working on all term. If you're interested in learning more about food insecurity and food insecurity on campuses, there are some links in this PowerPoint deck. This is also available in the course shell. And with that, let's actually look at the user stories for the food insecurity project. Let me go ahead and, so can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm in the wrong course shell. So let me get back into the right course shell here. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I closed a bunch of tabs before the meeting, but of course I closed the wrong one. So that was not ideal. Okay, so here we are. If you look at the course content tab in Desire to Learn, you'll see there's an item for project. And here are the Food Insecurity Notification System project stories. You can just go ahead and download it. It's a Word document. I'll just open it in the browser for now. So we start at the top with the epic story. So an epic story is a really high level story, the highest level story that you can imagine. And our epic level story for the food pantry project is, as a manager of a food pantry for food insecure students, I want a system for sending notifications to students so that I can tell them about specials and I can tell them when food is available. So that in a nutshell is what the entire system is about. Obviously, there's not enough detail in this story to go out and start coding. Hope that's obvious. So what we've done is we've broken the epic level story down into 4 user stories, which I'll cover in a second. Before that, I want to point out that each story is going to have this kind of format. As a role of the person who needs a system, I want what kind of system do they need, so that what purpose is the system serving, or what problem is having the system solving, and then any additional things like, and I can tell them when food is available. And then it also includes acceptance criteria. So this defines when the story has been solved, when a program has been written that solves the problem. So for this particular one, the acceptance criteria is the code is reviewed by another development team member, test cases are written, well architected, follows a structure like N-tier, model view controller, or so on. And we'll be learning about N-tier architecture later on in the class. And then the level 1 sprint stories are, so story 1, notification system, subscriber account creation and login. As a food insecure person, I want to enroll as a food pantry subscriber so that I can receive notifications from the food pantry. So same structure as the epic level story, but this one is almost kind of manageable. I mean, you can almost start to imagine a system that would solve these problems. It's still kind of at a high level though, right? I mean, it doesn't really talk about, well, yeah, but what's the interface look like? What are the screens that this thing is gonna have? And what capabilities does it need? And where's the data gonna go? And how's it gonna talk to the other applications? And so there's a lot of stuff that still needs to get nailed down. And part of what you're going to do in assignment 1 is start thinking about this story and the other 3 user stories and trying to figure out what other information you need before you can actually start implementing this. So my role here, and Kara's role and Mike's role as product owners, are to be people that you can come to and ask questions of. So for example, you might say, well, what are the password requirements? And if you ask us as the product owner, we might have some specific information, like security is important to us. We're dealing with student information and information about food insecurity, and so this is obviously really sensitive. So passwords have to be reasonably secure. And then you might come back and you might ask us a follow-up question like, okay, yeah, but like what requirements do you want for passwords? And then the answer is, hey, we just represent the pantry. I mean, that's a technical detail. We're not qualified to comment on that, or we don't know. Or, well, what do you think is the best thing to do? Why don't you make some suggestions about how you want to handle it, right? So if you ask us a question, we may be able to answer it as product owners, or we may not have a preference. We may think that you are better qualified to answer that question than we are. But in any event, you're going to have to ask some of those questions in order to understand what it is you're actually implementing. And then we have some acceptance criteria here as well. I won't actually go into detail. In this particular case, since security is a concern, some of the acceptance criteria for the subscriber account creation and login have to do with maintaining security of passwords by storing hashes instead of storing passwords in clear text. Story 2 is sending notifications. So as a food pantry manager, I want to notify subscribers of events so that they can know about specials and food availability. Here, you'll notice this one's targeted at a different user. The first story was targeted as a student who's food insecure, who wants to receive notifications. This story is targeted at a food pantry manager who wants to send notifications to students when food is available. So once again, the story is specific enough that you can start thinking about, well, what does the system actually have to do in order to meet these requirements? And you can also start looking at the acceptance criteria for when you would consider the story done. The third story is template creation. So as a food pantry manager, I want to create a template for different announcements so that staff can send notifications to subscribers by filling out a simple form. So you don't want to make everybody who's staffing the pantry have to compose a message from scratch. You want to make that process as easy as possible. And so here's a way of lowering the bar so that staff can send out notifications to students without having to write a message from scratch. And then the last story is review notification log. As a food pantry worker, I want to review notifications sent so that I can avoid sending duplicate messages, and I can make sure that messages are being sent out on a regular basis. And acceptance criteria here as well. So those are the 4 stories, the 4 user stories that we're going to be working on in Sprint 1. The idea here is that each person on a team of 4 is going to grab one of these stories to work on. If you end up on a team of 3, then probably you're going to skip template creation for Sprint 1 and then work on the other 3 stories for Sprint 1. And then for Sprint 2, we don't have fully fleshed out stories. What we have is, some kernels of stories that could be refined down into stories. They're more ideas for improvement. And some of the ideas for improvement are going to arise naturally as you're working on Sprint 1. Other suggestions may be things that the product owners, the pantry, are really invested in. So for example, one of these stories has to do with being able to send SMS messages to notify subscribers. And for tracking students who want to receive SMS messages, that's actually a big priority for the pantries. They want to not only be able to send email, but they want to be able to send SMS as well. There are a couple of other stories in here that the pantry really has high desire for. Some of these other stories might be pretty flashy and have a lot of impact when you're demoing the system. And so we might gently steer you towards those as well. But the bottom line is, as a team, you have to decide what features you think are important to work on and what you think that you can realistically get done in the second sprint. And then you're going to be responsible for taking whatever stories you choose and working them up into the form that we've worked up for these user stories. So that's basically how Sprint 1 and Sprint 2 are going to go. We're actually a little short on time, so I just want to talk about assignment 1 really briefly, and then I'll let you go and I'll stick around and answer questions if anybody has them. So assignment 1 at the bottom of module 1. This is your first assignment. It's going to be done individually. For 20 points, be sure to post to the introduce yourself discussion topic if you haven't already, and also read at least some of your classmates' introductions. Find people who you think you want to work with and reply to them to see if you might make a good team, because otherwise you're going to get stuck. I mean, we're basically going to start pulling names out of a hat based just on your language preferences, and nobody wants that. So the more lifting you do in order to find a good team, the better off it will be. And then for 30 points, we want you to think of 2 questions for each of the 4 user stories that are actually legitimately things that you will need to know in order to implement the system. So really think about, well, if I was going to design a system to solve this problem, What would it look like? What choices would I have to make? What kinds of things would the product owners actually have input in? Now remember, the product owners are non-technical. They're the ones with a problem that needs to be solved. If they were technical, they would write their own system and they wouldn't need you to do it. So you're bringing the technical expertise to this process. They are bringing the knowledge of the problem to the process. So there's 4 stories, so we're going to end up with 8 questions from each of you. I have a frequently asked questions list that I'm going to post to the discussion boards after the assignments are collected. And then over a period of time, which will no doubt be long, slow, and painful, I will integrate all of your questions into the frequently asked questions and add answers for anything that hasn't been asked already. And you'll see what I mean when you see the answers, the frequently asked questions. Part 2, and this is probably even, I mean, I can't stress how important this is. So we want you to mock up a full set of user interfaces for your current understanding of the stories. So for example, a student subscriber story, show me the screens that somebody is going to use, a student will use to register, to receive notifications, and to log into the system. And what does it look like when somebody's interacting with that system? So this will not only help you flesh out your ideas for what the system should look like, but no doubt you will come up with a lot of questions while you're putting that together that would qualify for part 1 here. And then part 3 is implementation notes. And here, would like you to think about sprint 1 is going to be about 4 weeks. And so think about if you're going to start implementing one of these stories over a 4-week period, what technical problems would you need to solve? What would your battle plan be? What would you sort of expect to get done week by week over that 4-week period so that you could end up with a system at the end of the 4 weeks that, that worked and that satisfied at least part of the requirements for sprint 1. So that is assignment 1. I'm going to turn it open for questions now. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them and feel free to stick around. If you feel like you've gotten everything and you have to run, we understand. And thank you and welcome to CIS 234A. I'm looking forward to working with you all this term. I think this is actually a really fun class. And I hope you agree with me by the end of the term. So if you have any questions, feel free to grab the mic and.
I was wondering, so we have Java, we have C#, and for PHP, is that PHP, JavaScript, HTML, CSS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have gotten a web team in the past. There's 2 ways of doing this depending on how many web developers we have. Some of the stories, the subscriber account creation and login in particular, they really want to be web facing. So if you want to have a system where students can register to receive notifications from the pantry, you really want that to be on the web. The stuff that the pantry uses to send notifications and to manage templates and to review the notification logs, those can be standalone applications that are installed on a computer in the pantry. And you know, I suppose you could put together a separate application in Java or C# that a student could use to register to receive notifications, but it's kind of odd. I mean, you really want people to be able to register using their cell phone or a web browser on a desktop, from Linux, from Mac, you know, PC, whatever. And really the web is probably the best interface for doing that. So what I would recommend, if possible, is find a web person who's familiar with the technology that your team wants to work in. If you want to do Java or C#, have one web person who knows how to do some web stuff and knows enough Java or C# to integrate with the rest of the team. So not 100% necessary, but definitely a good idea. Did that answer your question, Richard?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question?
There's actually a number of them in the chat.
Okay. Let me pop the chat up if I can figure out. So Kara, how did you actually do that?
Well, you could probably stop sharing.
Oh, it's more. I got it.
Might be the easiest.
I figured it out. Yeah, so the 3 dots at the top for the more settings.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Could it be a mock-up phone app, C# apps.net, ASP.net? Yes, well, we actually had a C# team in fall term. They were all working in C# and they used ASP.net to do a C# web interface, and it actually worked really well. But for more details, you'll have to talk to Mike Mostafavi, because if you're working on a C# team, he's going to be mentoring you on that. Kara and I will mentor you in Java and web stuff, but Michael is our C# resource. And then Abdullah says, when will you announce the teams? So Monday. We're hoping that all of you are posting to the discussion board by Friday evening and getting us your team preferences, if you have any, by Friday evening. And then if we haven't heard from you over the weekend, then you are trusting fate, and fate is a cruel mistress. But we will do it. We will put you in a team, and we will tell you on Monday how luck has treated you. And then Richard, Alex, I believe Visual Paradigm has a community edition. There's also Visio. Thank you, Richard. And Travis is tempting fate. And fate doesn't like it when you do that, but you know, hey. I just don't want to be standing too close to you when the bolt of lightning hits, particularly this turn. Anybody else have any questions? Oh, okay. Yeah, Visio is probably overkill. I mean, we're gonna be doing ERDs next term. I'm sorry, next week. We're going to be doing ERDs in week 2, and you can use Visio if you want, but I mean, for this stage, even just drawing it on a piece of paper and taking a shot of it with your cell phone is perfectly fine. I mean, we expect that your ERD will not be completely right when you submit it. And that's why we're having you do it, so that we can get back to you and say, hey, this might be a problem, or how are you planning on dealing with this, or whatever, so that you can revise your ERD before you actually create the database, which you're probably going to do in week 3. And then once you actually have created the database, once you have your foreign key constraints in, you can just use the automatic relational diagram generation stuff in Microsoft SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio in order to generate a database diagram for you. So yeah, you can avoid Visio unless you're really hardcore about it. I mean, I won't complain if you send it to me, but you don't need to. No, there are not going to be any regular class lectures, but we will have videos strewn around from week to week, depending on what particular topics we're covering. And we're also available to meet online if you have specific questions. And if you put in special requests, if there's something in particular that you feel would be useful to add to the course shell, we can probably be convinced to do that as well. That was in answer to the question whether there's going to be regular class lectures. Any other questions? Great. Do you want to toss in anything, Kara? Did I leave anything out that I should have said?
Not really. Maybe I'll just add that, you know, once we have the teams figured out, You know, depending on the technologies that each team will be using, you'll probably be assigned sort of a primary instructor, one of the three of us whose, you know, skill set matches the technologies that you're working with, and we'll be working with you, you know, closely. And so, you know, whatever you can't figure out in your team, and again, use those team resources like Mark said, but then definitely come to us, and we'll be in your stand-up meetings, hopefully, and you know, keeping a close sense of how your team is doing and supporting you wherever you need it.
That's right. Yes. Probably best if you CC all three of the instructors.
I have one other question, and this might be looking too far ahead, but just to kind of better understand what the deliverables look like in terms of the software. Are we doing like builds? Are we putting together like application files and SQL scripts or something like that into like a all-in-one package for deployment? Or
Yeah. So depending on what language you're working in, you'll probably be using either IntelliJ if you're doing Java development, or Visual Studio if you're using C#. You'll be putting together if you're working in Visual Studio, you'll be putting together a C# solution with different projects in it. If you're working in IntelliJ, you'll be putting together a project with different packages in it. So, and we'll talk more about the package structure of your project later on in the course. But the idea is all of your source code will be in the IntelliJ project or the Visual Studio solution. And you're just going to zip up that project folder and upload it to the assignment folder. You'll also be using a Git repository to store your project. Each member of the project will have a separate branch that you're going to be working in during the sprint. At the end of sprint 1, you're going to be merging your branches together to come up with a final version of the project or solution that has all of your code in it. And that's what you're going to use as the basis of your sprint 1 presentation, and also as the starting point for your sprint 2 work. And at the end of sprint 2, you're going to merge your code together, and hopefully you'll have a working final version of the program that you can use for the final presentations. Does that answer all of your questions?
yeah, I think so. I just wanted to know, like, at one point we're gonna, you know, try and integrate these all into something that works and decide which versions of each file and everything to kind of put together, and you answered that.
Good. Yeah, you're going to be working on separate applications, though, that are in the same project or solution. And you'll be sharing libraries. So we're going to be using an N-tier architecture or model view controller. Bottom line, though, is you probably want to have a shared or shareable database class, and you might want to have some shared business logic classes that multiple people use. But you really only have to worry about merging that stuff together at the end of each sprint.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Don't sweat, Travis.
Yeah, just take it one step at a time, right? I mean, think about the first assignment. All of you can work on the first assignment, you know, and we'll be kind of giving you guidance along the way as you start getting into the actually implementing these things, and, oh, what library should I use for that? And how do we do this? And we'll be working with you guys along the way.
Right. It will be fun.
Definitely.
And I think after you get through this course, I mean, I think you probably have some industrial experience already, but if you don't have industrial experience, I think that after you've gotten out of this course, you're going to have a really good feel for what it's really going to be like when you start out at a software development company. Anything else? Yeah, good. It's good to have the people close to us who are cheering us on. Oh, excellent. Well, if you have any pointers for us along the way, be sure to share them with us. Oh, that's great, Sarah. That was sort of what we were hoping to accomplish with this meeting. Get everybody off on a good foot. I mean, I kind of want to be on Travis's wife's team now too. Yes, please. If you have any team preferences, please email them to us. And that will prevent the terrible disaster of us assigning you to a random team. No problem, Becca. So do y'all like Discord, Slack, Skype, Zoom? What do you all mainly use for like synchronous chat type stuff? Slack and Zoom, Zoom, Discord, Zoom, Discord, Skype, Zoom. It's actually a lot, it's more mixed than I thought it was. Posting prefs in the thread on the discussion is okay, yes. Yeah, I thought all the cool kids were using Discord nowadays, but I kind of like Zoom myself. I mean, you know, if you have a decent mic and headset, it's just pretty convenient to pop on. You can do desktop sharing and so on. But the nice thing about Discord is you have a record. It's pretty good, and it's got the built-in microphone stuff. I actually don't know, Brendan. I think they're all suspect. WeChat is the worst, though. I do know that. Weishi, WeChat. The Chinese government is deep into Weishi and runs keyword filtering on it and basically monitors all of their citizens who use it. So my advice is to not use WeChat. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a shame too, because it's a pretty nice system and you can give red envelopes to people with money in them and they have lots of stickers and yada yada. So I mean, it's fairly pleasant to use, but politically speaking, it's just a nightmare. Yeah, I knew that. Well, I had you in my, was it 233W course a couple of terms ago? Is that right, Julie? Yeah.
Yeah, the government watched the WeChat.
Mm-hmm.
So not sure it's a lot of fate. So right now, all the WeChat is very crazy. All the government, if see something your WeChat post is against the government or whatever, they block the information immediately.
Mm.
Yeah, so in China, actually in China, in a website, this part, they not freedom.
Right. No, I mean, it's probably, it's probably better that they block it than what they used to do, which is basically just start a file on you if you had communications that got flagged.
They record everything.
Yeah.
Record all each people, they are typing and watching and talking and sending money, everything. The government, they record record everything. They can
Mhm.
check everything. Where you're from. So that is really danger, I feel.
Oh, no, I agree completely. I mean, it's like, it's definitely scary.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. And
And
it, oh, go on.
okay. So I heard some things is Japan, but I'm not sure. I don't remember what is the name for that one. And the other one is look like from WhatsApp. I don't know.
Yeah.
You heard that WhatsApp?
Yeah, I have. Well, Line is a system that people use in Japan. Thanks, Becca. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, actually, there is a recording, and I should probably have turned off the recording already. By the way, thank you for starting the recording up, Kara, because I completely forgot. And then when I remembered that I forgot, I noticed that you had already started it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we missed the instructor intros, but we got most of the content.
Ah, okay. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, we did stop the recording. No. I'm going to stop the recording now.